Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vertebrae. My name is J.D. McBride, and I am excited to read you one of my original stories, The Disciples of the Archangels. Word of warning, this story features graphic violence, descriptions of gore, and discussions of suicide. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If I had known what I know now, I would have never accepted that case. If I'd known how much sleep I'd lose, if I'd known about the nightmares I'd have, if I'd known what I'd pay in blood, I would have never accepted the money. Telling this story is going to be a laborious task that requires my whole soul, but I don't care. I need to tell my story. I need to say what happened, or my mind will explode. My story begins 8 months back in the spring of 1998. I had a solo practice as a private investigator. Most of my cases were people hiring me to see if their spouse was cheating, or vetting high-up corporate job candidates. Lowbrow stuff with low pay to match. So when a case offered to pay $10,000 up front and $20,000 if the case was resolved, my heart skipped a beat. I could have paid for a house up front with this kind of money. They were grieving parents wanting me to investigate the death of their son, Jonathan Felther. From what they told me over the phone, he was in with a bad crowd, but has turned his life around by 28. He's recently been promoted to shift manager at the local Circle K, and he had a positive outlook on life. Then one morning he didn't show up for work. No call, no nothing. Then he didn't show up the next day, and they called a welfare check. The sheriff went out to his apartment and got no response. After he got permission from the parents to enter his home, they found the apartment in pristine condition. The only thing amiss was his suicide note on the counter, and his car was missing. So they put a BOLO notice out on his car. It was found shortly later, parked on a bridge with no sign of Jonathan. The investigation was open and shut within the day. Just a classic suicide, but the family wasn't convinced. They said he would never do this to himself, and he had a positive outlook. I wanted to tell the family that every family member of a suicide victim thinks they would never do it, but the pay was good enough to humor them. My investigation began by traveling 3 counties over to Job County, Illinois, to the town of Memphis, Illinois. The town had a population of 1,500 and dropping. The coal mine and factories shutting down the decade prior hit that town hard. Memphis used to have a population of 11,000 and a thriving economy in 1980. By 1990, abandoned buildings almost outnumbered people. The whole town felt dead. When I arrived, the weather was in between mist and rain. The red hue of the sunset made the mist look like a shroud of blood showering the earth. My first stop was the Job County Sheriff's Office, but it closes at 5, and it was around 6:30. I stopped at a gas station/hotel on the edge of town. I remember the clerk eyeing me suspiciously as I paid for my room and gas. I guess Memphis is one of those towns that are wary of outsiders. My room reeked of cigarette smoke, and the bed sheets were itchy. I still had some motivation, so I decided to ask around about Jonathan. My first stop was the Circle K he worked at. I drove up to the building and walked through the door with a ding announcing my presence. The woman behind the counter looked real rough around the edges, like she had lived more years than her body allowed. "May I help you?" she asked as I approached the counter. "Indeed you can," I said. "I'm a private investigator looking into the death of Jonathan Felther." Her face turned sour when I mentioned his name. "What do you want to know about him?" she said, almost spitting out the last word. "What was he like in the weeks leading up to his death?" I asked. "Ever since he was promoted a few weeks back, he started acting funny," she said with abhorrence in her voice. "He'd snap at us for the smallest things, and he'd always be holed up in his office." Her eyes drifted into the distance before continuing. "He'd show up to work late, smelling funny, and just clean for his whole shift. So he was acting erratically," I said. "That's putting it lightly," she said, raising her voice. "He went off the deep end." "I was told he had a spotty past," I said with a quizzing tone. "Do you know anything about that?" "Yeah, I heard he used to be in the Disciples back in the late 80s, she said. "But I don't know." "All right, I have what I need," I said as I turned to leave. "Wait," she said gravely. "I gotta warn you, the Disciples are dangerous." I nodded in acknowledgement and got back in my car. I remember thinking, who the hell are the Disciples? In hindsight, I should have listened to her. I should have left town and never came back. The car ride to the hotel was uneventful. I drifted into an uneasy sleep. That town had its ways to unnerve you. I woke up early in the morning and got breakfast at this dingy diner. The only other customer in this establishment was this greasy-haired man in a stained black coat. He gave me the same look the clerk at the hotel gave me. I brushed this off as town-wide suspicion of outsiders. The sheriff's office was this small building with 2 SUV cruisers outside. The sheriff's secretary was trying to get me to leave, but when I mentioned who I was investigating, the sheriff himself came out of his office and invited me in. The sheriff was this fat, balding old man with a thick country accent. He sat me down and asked me what I wanted to know. "What happened the night Jonathan Felther went missing?" I asked. "Well, I was on patrol and dispatch told me I had to perform a welfare check," he said, pausing to clear his throat. "I arrived at his apartment and his car wasn't there, and I got no response when I knocked, so with the family's permission I gained entry," he said with a frown coming over his face. The apartment was spotless save for the suicide note on the counter. A small tear formed in his eye. "We put a bolo out on his car and it was found a few hours later on Dead Man's Bridge," he said with his face now going blank. "Why is it called Dead Man's Bridge?" I asked curiously. "The bridge is 30 feet above a creek and has no guardrails. People drive off the bridge all the time," he answered, sounding vexed by my interruption. "There was no sign of Jonathan. The car was there by its lonesome with the driver's door open," he said with a sigh. "It was pretty obvious this was a cut-and-dry suicide," he said. "The family has been trying to get me to reopen the case, but I don't have the resources to investigate a suicide as a murder." "Okay," I said, marking down some key points on a notepad. "If he was murdered, who would the suspects be?" "To my knowledge, the only enemies he had were the damned disciples," he said. "They've been a thorn in my side for a while. I wouldn't be surprised if they did this." "Tell me about the disciples," I said, getting ready to write. "The disciples of the Archangels were founded as an alternative religious movement back in 1985, he said. "In the beginning, they didn't cause any problems. By the end of the year, I'd had to run them off private property 10 times, and their leader had been arrested 12 times, he said, shaking his head. He got up to retrieve something from the filing cabinet on the back wall of his office. "This is Elijah Karam," he said, smacking a file folder on the desk. "Mad as a hatter, I'll tell you what." The file had a mugshot paperclip to the front. The man in the mugshot had wild eyes behind metal frame glasses. His hair was a messy gray-blonde tangle that led into a similarly kept beard. "He's the leader of the disciples and a diagnosed schizophrenic," the sheriff said while flicking through more files on his cabinet. "He also has a long rap sheet of petty crimes and 3 mental hospital stays." He tossed another file onto the desk. "This is Matthew Jacobs." The mugshot on this file showed a thin, sinewy man with short, greasy hair. "He's the right-hand man to Elijah," the sheriff said, sitting back down. "Like Elijah, he has a long rap sheet of petty crimes and drug possession. I've personally arrested him twice." I was barely able to keep up writing notes. "They used to have this church," he punctuated with air quotes, "but it burned down quite a while ago. Ever since, they seem to hang out in this abandoned paper mill on South Mine Street," he said with yet another sigh. "I've had to go out there and remove them a couple times, but since I can't get a hold of the owner of the place, I can't press charges." "Any idea where I can find either of them?" I asked. "Well, Elijah has an arrest warrant out because he didn't meet with his parole officer, and Matthew didn't show up to his court-mandated Narcotics Anonymous meeting. Your guess is as good as mine," he said. "Thank you, Sheriff," I said, extending my hand for a handshake. I have enough information to move forward with my investigation." "You're very welcome," he said, reciprocating my handshake. "A word of warning. These people are dangerous. I haven't been able to prove it yet, but I'm pretty sure they're behind a whole mess of crime." I gave him a nod and left the building. My watch read 9:45, so I figured I'd have had time to check out the paper mill the sheriff told me about. It was about a 15-minute drive through town. As I drove, the town went from aging yet inhabited buildings to hollow concrete husks of what used to be. The paper mill was the largest building on the street. The industrial part of the building was 5 stories tall and had no windows visible from the front. It was connected to a square 3-story office building by a skywalk. A tall, barbed wire fence surrounded 3 sides of the complex, but the 4th side was up against a creek and had no fence. No trespassing signs were hung on the fence every 15 feet. I figure if I wanted to get into the building undetected, I would have to come back at nighttime to use the cover of darkness to my advantage. I drove back to the hotel I was staying at to make my notes into a sensible timeline. When I got out of my car, a man in a hoodie with his face obscured by the shadow cast by the hood ran up to me and grabbed my sleeve. He said to me, "I've heard you've been poking around. It's in your best interest to leave us alone, stranger, or bad things may happen to you." The man ran away before I had any chance to react. At this time, this didn't deter me. In fact, it only made me want to bring down these weirdos more. I went into the hotel room and utilized the cigarette burn desk to spread out my notes. Though before I began, I deadbolted the door and closed the curtains. Having all your information spread out and visible at once is a great help. I had 2 confirmed members, a hideout, and a potential 3rd member. Your brain has a way of filtering out the boring and only remembering the interesting. I believe that my entire day up to 7:15 p.m. was filtered from my memory. I hopped in my car with my disposable camera and notepad, bound for the paper mill. The sun was just setting, sending brilliant streaks of orange and red through the sky. Fascinating that something so beautiful precedes something so black. By the time I reached the mill, the sun had completely set and bathed the structure in darkness. I parked in front of the fence and walked up to the gate. The gate had a large bike lock securing it closed. I looked for a different way in and found my entrance on the far side of the fence. Time and likely vandals had eroded the fence and created a human-sized hole. I carefully climbed through the fence as not to tear my clothing. Most of the windows were covered with metal bars, all except one on the western side of the office section. I approached the windows and saw the bars had been cut off with a gas torch. Beads of formerly molten metal curled down the stumps of the bars like wax down a candle. I turned my flashlight on, the dimmest setting, and pointed it into the room. The room looked to have been an office, but now serves as a makeshift living space. Discarded food cans and water bottles were piled in one corner. A foul-smelling bucket inhabited another corner, and dead center was a filthy sleeping bag surrounded by cigarette butts. I saw a yellow pocket-sized notebook sitting on the sleeping bag, and I picked it up and shoved it into my waistband. On its own, the living area didn't scare me all that bad. Probably belonged to a homeless man, but what was inside the central room sent an electric shiver up my spine and dug a pit in my stomach. My flashlight fell upon an altar, not the winsome works of art sitting handsomely at that of a church, but a crudely constructed affront to the eyes. The altar was a table that looked to be 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet off the ground. The frame was made of rebar welded end to end, and the inside of the frame was filled with plywood painted with strange symbols. As I got closer, I recognized the symbols as Greek letters painted in what looked to be blood. Worst of all is that the blood looked to be a fresh coat covering several older coats. The top of the altar bore a triangle with several circles contained within it. A curved dagger covered with blood sat on the right side, and on the left side sat a bowl filled with coagulated blood. I snapped photographs of the latter from all angles. Without photo proof, I feared no one would believe me. Should have ran right there. Should have given an anonymous tip to the sheriff and skipped town, but I didn't. Be it desire for the truth, be it foolhardy confidence, something compelled me to keep looking through that building. I spotted a stairwell across the room and remembered the skywalk leading to the factory. I decided to travel up the stairwell, clearing the 2 floors above me as I went. Then I would cross into the factory. I crept up the stairwell and aimed my flashlight up. Mold was growing on almost every surface, which gave the air a terrible musty smell. No sign of anything was present on the 2nd and 3rd floor. They were simply carbon copies of the 1st floor, be it without the altar. The sky bridge stemmed from the 3rd floor and led into the factory. The floor-to-ceiling windows had long been smashed, and shards of glass clung to the frames. I walked across and ended up on a corrugated metal catwalk that had a staircase leading to the ground on one side and a bridge across the factory in front of me. I scanned the room with my flashlight. It was filled with large, rusty machinery. When my flashlight illuminated a shadowy corner, I could have sworn I saw a shadow retreat from the light. I felt this immutable feeling wash over me again, compelling me to keep looking. I crept down the staircase's 3 landings and stepped onto the ground floor. I swept my flashlight across the room, taking notes of the many spots I could duck for cover or hide in. I had walked about 20 paces when I heard footsteps behind me scraping against the grime and dirt, caking the floor and heavy stomping on the metal catwalk above me. I whipped around and saw 2 figures cloaked in black robes that looked to be stitched from bed sheets and baling twine, basking in the light. Then I heard the man above me start walking and start to speak. His voice was a mix between gravelly chain smoker and a broken vinyl as he growled his prayer at me. "O Lord Michael, mightiest of the angels and weigher of souls, afford me the strength to bruise the serpent's head." I whipped my flashlight up to the catwalk. His face was concealed by his hood. "I deliver me and my faithful unto you and only you as our divine judge. I shivered as I heard the two figures before me draw closer, but I couldn't look away from the man on the catwalk. The fear held me statue still. "You have given us a trial of faith, an opportunity to prove ourselves. Purge the heretic from us. Can I get an amen?" I woke up from my trance as the two cloaked figures rushed me. I dived to my left and the figure on the right stumbled and fell. "I said, can I get an amen?" The hooded figure shouted above me. "Amen." The chorus of responses didn't just come from the two I'd seen, but from all around me. I saw the staircase 15 paces in front of me and dead sprinted to it. I got cut off halfway by an unhooded but cloaked figure tackling me. My grip failed me and my flashlight fell to the ground. Me and the figure tumbled into the darkness, and I heard my camera crunch from the impact with the ground. The figure had pinned my left hand to my chest with impossible strength and took up position on top of me. I threw my right fist into his face with a hooked punch. He moaned in pain and loosened his grip on my left hand. I reared back and threw another punch into the side of his neck. He fell off of me, and in the same instant I saw my flashlight on my left. I grabbed it and scrambled to the stairs. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and my breath was fast and shallow. I half ran, half crawled up to the first landing of the staircase with incredible speed. Then another figure ambushed me. My flashlight lit up his wild eyes and ghoulish features before he hit me hard in the jaw. I saw stars dance before my eyes and tasted hot blood in my mouth. Then he threw another punch at me, but this time I blocked it with my forearm. The man stumbled backwards, and I used his temporary weakness to hit him hard in the throat. He gasped like a fish out of water, and his hand shot up to his neck. I hurled my fist into his chin with all my might, and he dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes. Somewhere in the fray, I had dropped my flashlight, but I didn't care. I just kept running. "He can't interrupt the feast," someone shouted behind me. When I reached the top of the stairs, I sprinted across the skywalk and practically jumped down the stairwell. By the time I reached the bottom, I heard a storm of footsteps coming down after me, and at least 6 voices howling and shouting. They sounded like a pack of wild animals. I ran as fast as lightning past the altar into the office. I vaulted the window and heard the thunderstorm of voices and stomping just reach the altar room. I ran faster than I'd ever ran before and reached my car in world record time. I threw the car in reverse and peeled out of there like a bat out of hell. From there, the drive was a blur of streetlights and concrete husks until I found a payphone. Tried to punch 911 into the number pad with my right index finger, but a horrible ripple of pain halted my efforts. I noticed my right hand was pale red and my fingers had swollen to the size of bratwursts. I dialed 911 and put the receiver to my ear with my thankfully pain-free left hand. I don't really remember the conversation with the 911 operator. All I remember is that it felt like an eternity sitting on the curb waiting for the cops to show up. I became hyper-aware of the shadows and brush surrounding me, for each hiding spot could conceal a cultist. Somewhere in the eternity of waiting, I remembered the notebook in my waistband. I flipped to the first page and was flashbanged by the contents. Most of the writing on the first 10 pages was chicken-scratch cursive lining every piece of available space. Some pages had enough lucidity for me to read them. Most of it was nonsensical religious rambling and complex mathematics that I suggest had no meaning at all. The occasional diagram spotted the pages, but those only served to confuse me more. From the bits and pieces I could scrounge up, their leader Elijah had a vision from God that told him the angels would come down to earth in an event known as the Feast. They would devour the souls of the unworthy and take their faithful up to heaven. The 9 pages preceding the final page were long lines of math full of symbols and diagrams that I only vaguely remember from my college math courses. The final page said that the feast would occur on tomorrow's date, and that they would need to sacrifice an apostatized disciple to gain favor of the angels. Below the writing was a clipping from a map of the woods surrounding the dead man's bridge with an X marking a spot deep in the trees. I don't know how long I stared at the notebook before I saw the Crown Vic police cruiser arrive. It stood up to offer a left-handed handshake to the tired-looking officer. He accepted my offer and cleared his throat. "Hello, sir. Dispatch told me you called to report an assault," the officer said with haggardness in his voice and eyes. Shit, where do I begin?" I said, shaking like a tree in a storm. I've been investigating this cult, the Disciples of the Archangels. You've heard of them, right?" "Yes, I have, sir," the officer said, raising an eyebrow at me. "Well, I tracked them down to this paper mill on the edge of town, and, I went in to see what they were doing," I said. "Yes, go ahead," the officer said, getting out his notepad. I found, this altar and like a living space inside the building, and the altar was smeared with blood and had this bloody dagger on top of it. I have pictures if you need them, I said, my tone of voice reflecting my inner terror. Yes, that would definitely help a potential investigation, the officer said as he looked me in the eyes. Are you okay? You know what? You should probably sit down. I gingerly sat on the curb and the officer followed suit. I made my way to the industrial part of the building, and their leader showed up and made them attack me. I barely managed to fight them off. Shit, I think they would have killed me, I said, even though I knew my words didn't do the experience justice. Who attacked you? The officer questioned. These people in dark robes, and they had hoods on, so I couldn't see any faces, I said, finally beginning to calm down. They said something about something they called the feast, and I found his notebook. I handed the notebook to the cop, and he opened it to the relevant page. Well, I want to see the film from your camera, the officer demanded. I reached into my pocket and removed the shattered remains of the camera. I pulled apart the plastic hull until I found the roll of film. It had been skewered by several pieces of plastic. I felt overwhelming defeat wash over me. I'll take this film and the notebook for you, but now there's no evidence of a crime being committed, so I'll check out the mill, the cop said. I can't make any promises on what'll happen, though. I prodded my right hand and let the pain distract me from the helplessness. I shook the officer's hand once more and he drove off in his cruiser. The only sounds were the shriek of the crickets and the hum of my car's engine. I hopped and drove back to my hotel. I got inside the hotel and opened up my office supplies to try and make a splint for my broken fingers. I rigged up some paper clips and rubber bands into an okay sprint. My heart still pounded involuntarily and I didn't even feel the slightest bit tired. I stayed up the whole night and only fell asleep around 8 a.m. I woke up at 4 in a panic. I needed to get to the place where the feast would take place. That would get me the evidence I needed to bring the cult down. I sprinted to my car and drove up to the Dead Man's Bridge. The sheriff was right. That bridge was a death trap. I turned around with a tight 3-point turn and parked about a mile up the road. With my camcorder in hand, I briskly walked to the bridge. I headed off into the woods in the direction I thought the X was in. I only got about 30 paces into the brush when I saw it. Sitting in the center of a large circular clearing was a stone obelisk. It was giant, maybe 15 feet high and 5 by 5 feet at the base. Many complex engravings were cut into the black granite that made up the construction. When I looked at them long enough, they seemed to move on their own. I figured this is where they were going to have their feast, so I took up position 30 feet away. I laid down on the ground, concealed underneath the bushes, and waited. I waited for hours in the brush. The dark of the night revealed that the pillar glowed a soft red. The night was growing old when the cultists arrived. They came in groups, the first setting up candles and drawing symbols on the ground with a brush and a can of paint that definitely was not full of paint. The next group was the two men with the hoods of their robes down. In the dim light, I recognized them as Matthew and Elijah. I fought hard to suppress my breathing, which was rapidly increasing in tempo, and I gingerly angled my camera towards the event and pressed record. The last group carried in a man who seemed unconscious, but the small fight he put up against the zip ties holding his hands and feet together proved he was still awake. They sat him up against the side of the obelisk, and the whole cult formed a circle around the dark construction. There were 16 members in total. Elijah approached the bound man and produced a book and dagger from his robe. I could see the man start to squirm and struggle in panic. Elijah flicked the book open and began to read. "O Michael, great wearer of souls and guardian of heaven, accept our humble offering as the start to your army's great feast. Let the evil and corrupt be purged from the world. Let us return to the days of Eden. We are your faithful. We are your flock." He put the book back into his robe, and I watched petrified as he moved closer and flicked the dagger upside down in his hand. I sat completely still to avoid detection and watched the awful scene unfold. He raised the dagger up to the heavens and down into the man's chest in a semicircle arc. He stabbed him with so much force I could hear the ribs crack and the flesh tear from my hiding spot. The man groaned and leaned forward. The sound of blood pouring from his chest was like a garden hose. Elijah pushed him up against the pillar and pulled the dagger from his chest. He then raised the dagger again, casting a candlelit shadow right onto my hiding spot, and brought it down into the man's chest once more. The bound man twitched for a few agonizing seconds, then went limp. Elijah released his grip, and the dead man slumped forward. The blood pooled around him in a dark puddle oozing outwards. The man let out a terrible clicking, gurgling noise. One of the cultists leaned forward and spewed vomit from under his hood. The pillar began to grow more intensely and hummed like a television set. The ring of cultists fell to their knees simultaneously, as if compelled towards hell by some unseen force. Elijah stepped backwards and raised his arms towards the stars. The glowing light concentrated towards the pinnacle of the obelisk. At the same time, dark tendrils rose from the bloody puddle on the ground. The tendrils grew taller and wove together akin to tree roots, and the red light outshone the candles all around the ground. As the tendrils became taller than the cultists, a black misty shroud descended onto the twisting mass. The tendrils grew and grew until they were just as tall as the trees. It towered over us all, a twisting mass of shadow and tendrils. I looked through the screen on my camera and saw that where the entity should be was just a void of dead pixels moving to conceal the ungodly thing. Then I saw the light leave the obelisk and form an orb that traveled up above the pillar of vines, and then traveled down into union with it. The union of the three components sparked a change in the entity. Its body began to writhe, and the dark shroud began to shiver with evil energy. It slowly wriggled forward until it was not 3 feet from Elijah. Elijah had let his arms fall back to his sides, and was shaking with fear. The entity shot 2 tentacles from its body, one wrapped around Elijah's hips and the other around his shoulders. Many other smaller tentacles wormed their way outside the dark shroud and hungrily squirmed, waiting for their prey. I heard his bones crunch under the immense pressure exerted by the entity, and a pained gasp escaped from Elijah. Then, in a fraction of a second, but to me felt like 10,000 years, the entity forced Elijah's shoulders to his hips, backwards. It went by so slowly in my mind that I felt like I was watching frame by frame. Frame 1. Elijah begins to bend backwards and terror floods his expression. Frame 2. Elijah yelps in pain and the first of his vertebrae snap. He grits and bars his teeth. Frame 3. The light leaves Elijah's eyes as his back is bent at a 45-degree angle. Frame 4. The back of Elijah's head meets his pelvis with one final sickening crunch. Then, the entity pulled Elijah into the mass of hungry tentacles. They all wrapped around Elijah's body, sounding like a bowl of pasta being stirred. They righted his body back to a standing position and dragged him into the dark shroud. I heard grinding and cracking and smacking as a new pool of blood formed around the base of the entity. Finally, the entity jettisoned a small pile of bone fragments onto the ground. The cultists had all risen from their knees, but like me, were transfixed by the hellish spectacle. After the sounds from the entity subsided, it began to wriggle backwards towards the obelisk. It used about a dozen yard-long tendrils to climb up the obelisk. It now towered high above the trees and extended its tendrils to wrap around the branches of a nearby tree. I will never forget the deafening sound of the tree swaying and cracking as the entity swung like a monkey through the canopy. This seemed to wake us from our trance. No man cared about religion or anything except survival anymore. We all scattered like cockroaches through the woods. I don't know how I ran so fast. I don't know how I didn't crash driving back into town. I ejected the VHS tape from the camcorder and scrawled the words "You were right" across it. Then I set it on the door handle of the locked sheriff's office. From there, all I can remember is arriving at my office 30 miles away. The absence of my luggage told me I didn't even stop to get my stuff from the hotel. Then, I gathered all my cash from my office and my personal affects from the apartment above. After that, I hit the road. Ever since that night, I've been living as a transient. I never stay in one town for more than 2 weeks at a time, and I pretend to be deaf so I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't think I'll speak another word to anybody for quite a long time. The paranoia is eating me from the inside out. In every shadowy corner, I swear I can see that thing writhing and wriggling in the darkness. Every dream I have has been every scenario imaginable to do with the entity. I average about 8 hours of sleep a week these days. The news is yet to report on the incident, and I doubt they ever will. Well, that's been the Disciples of the Archangels. This was a fun one to write. I had a great time start to finish making this. Honestly, there was no boring point writing this story. The climax, that was so fun to write. But I could geek out here about the writing process forever. But I'm going to let y'all go. I've been your host, JD McBride. Good night.